me, you are not responsible for everything that happened to you, but you are responsible for the part you play and how you rise from it. Radical accountability is the line between staying wounded and becoming wise. Today, in this episode, we're going to be covering radical accountability and how it can help shift your life from pain to purpose. My name is Michael Perry, and I'm joined today by Justin, and this is the new Ashla Podcast. So radical accountability. This is such a beautiful topic and such an important one. In fact, even our teachings kind of revolve around this, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, they do. One of our 12 agreements is responsibility, which is accountability. It's what we use to describe accountability. And if you don't mind, I'd like to read a little bit from our teachings about responsibility.
Yeah, please do.
So it is up to each of us to emphasize nobility in our words and actions. I emphasize the word noble, which in this context means qualities that are somewhat elevated from the traits that commonly hold us down. Delighting in scandal, gossip, is simply unworthy of our quest. It brings out the worst in people while disregarding justice and fairness. Scandal and gossip are the playthings of small minds taking pleasure from someone else's ruin. It is a way of life. Responsibility is a way of life that entails every minute of the day, and that is the reputation we strive for. We must be responsible with our words and respectful to others. We have a responsibility to ourselves and others to be as open and honest as possible and not to allow others to spread false truth in our presence. We should stand up for the truth whenever possible. I would never say anything about someone without them in attendance that I would not speak to them directly. Likewise, I've never allowed someone to badmouth a person behind their back if it was not true and they were not willing to say it to the person directly. We should stand up for people when they cannot defend themselves in hopes that others do this for us. You need to be accountable for every choice, every action, and every outcome. It can and will be a struggle for your entire life going forward on this path. But without the burden of responsibility and the drive to excel in everything you do, being a knight has no real meaning. It becomes nothing more than an empty word people use to feel special. Accountability should always be self-initiated. Many of us follow a simple standard of behavior defined by the culture we live in or a self-defined set of rules for conducting themselves. Others adhere to a particular code of conduct belonging to a group or organization. I will not argue which one of these is better or worse. It kind of depends on the person. Responsibility is what gives what we do, Michael, its meaning. It is what separates our path from others. So that's just a little snippet from our teachings about responsibility. And of course, responsibility is woven into everything we do. So by default, accountability is too. And accountability is very, very, very important on this path.
Yeah. Well, it's like accountability. There's so much nobility in it, especially in the teachings in which you're saying right there. But accountability isn't just for living a virtuous life to be noble and to do the right thing.
Right.
Accountability is something that can remove shackles from you that you've carried your whole life.
Yeah.
Accountability can liberate you from your own demons because often when we don't acknowledge the things in our life that we are active participants in, whether we want to see that or not,
Right.
we become slaves to it.
Yeah.
But through radical accountability, we can truly look at the part we play in our own suffering.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what is radical accountability?
Well, again, this aligns perfectly with our teachings because we teach and encourage practice on self-mastery, right? Responsibility, virtue. It's really one of the things that hold our philosophy in the way of Ashla up. It allows us to explore accountability, not just as this kind of nice sounding moral concept, right?
Yeah.
But this transcends that and it becomes like a spiritual discipline and a path towards our personal sovereignty and, of course, our growth and transformation. And it's really something it's a lot more than just admitting when you're wrong, although that's important. Although that's important too, but it really is a full conscious ownership of everything that comes from your being, your actions, your energy, your presence, and the impact you have on people.
Yeah. Well, I think even on the other side of things, you have those who avoid accountability who want to point the finger. But there are also those who are on the other side of the extreme of accountability. And that
Yeah,
extreme accountability of saying I'm sorry all the time, of taking the blame just to help everyone else out, that is not radical accountability either.
right,
It is being able to also, when you are radically accountable, to be accountable to, hey, I did not do that, and
right.
point that out. And
Yeah.
you know who you are, who I'm talking to right now, because that's not for everyone, but those who constantly apologize and
Mm,
constantly just take blow after blow without standing up for themselves. Accountability is also being accountable to yourself.
right, right. And not letting yourself take the blame and the fall for
Yeah.
everything. It's one of those things where it says like I'm responsible for what I create, both internally and externally. And that includes those boundaries and
You
standing up
know?
for yourself too. But I want people to understand it's not about blame.
No.
It's about liberation. It's about growth. It's about, as you said perfectly, removing those shackles.
And so often we find ourselves tied to things, whether it's that horrible job or that bad relationship. And I
Mm,
mean, most people listening will know exactly what I'm talking about. Where it's like you stayed in that relationship too long and you can blame the person, you can blame the manipulation, the
mm,
circumstances, but in the end, it was a choice.
yeah,
Same with
yeah,
that job. Yeah, you're making enough money where you're gonna have to take a pay cut going somewhere else. You're gonna have to struggle for a bit looking for that new job. I'm not saying quit your job and go look for a new job,
right,
but accept that you staying in a position where you are suffering is your choice.
yeah. Well, that's yeah. That's where I was going to go with it next was the choice, choices,
Yeah.
choices, choices. We have all kinds of choices in front of us all the time. And this idea of radical accountability is taking ownership of your choices. Even when you're triggered, even when something throws you off kilter, you gotta take back the power. You gotta take back the responsibility. You gotta take responsibility for your words. Even when somebody deserves to get, across the mouth.
Yeah.
You have to own that. And you gotta make the choice that's aligned. We talk about alignment all the time, aligned with your best interest and doing as little harm as possible. A lot of people out there run into people, I do all the time, that deserve kind of some harsh words, for example. But I take
Yeah.
responsibility for those words and I turn it back around, because what they do is a reflection of them. What I do is a reflection of me.
Oh,
But
well
you
said.
gotta own your energy. You gotta own your intention. Even in your moments of silence, you gotta own that.
Yeah.
So and your tone, you know,
Yeah.
just
Well, it's
everything.
like we were talking about the definition. The definition of radical honest or radical accountability is owning your thoughts, actions, choices, reactions, and your own healing,
Mm,
your own journey, your own path. It is pure responsibility to the life you are living and how you show up in it. And I love how you brought up it's not blame, nor is it blaming yourself either.
right.
A lot of this work, we talk about how it's all these inner reflections and how do not judge yourself, give yourself compassion. This is all compassionate work. The more you can get to a place where you can look at things objectively and realize you are human. We are
Yeah.
all going to make mistakes. We are all going to slip up. We're all going to have these moments where we stay in those messed up situations. But to learn from it, we must not judge ourselves for it.
And this is why it's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard. Many people in my life that I counsel or, lend my ear to or my advice to, this is a big one for them. It's very, very difficult because everybody wants to just own the outcome, right? Which sometimes can be hard enough, but you got to own everything, even the stuff that wasn't your fault, even the stuff that didn't start with you.
Right. When it comes down to accountability is empowerment, not
Yeah.
guilt. And that goes for both other people and yourself.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we're kind of moving into why it's so hard because the ego that is in disharmony fears accountability.
Yeah. Well, the ego's always like, I'm not the problem. I'm doing everything I
Uh-huh.
can.
Right. Well, because it sees weakness, it sees accountability as a weakness or failure, like you're admitting that you're not great enough.
Yeah.
and all
You
this.
become lesser than.
Right. But accountability, as you just said, is the path to power and clarity, and actually that true freedom,
Yeah.
that freedom that we, like you said earlier, unshackle ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at people who lack accountability, who really struggling, you know who we're talking about. Those people are constantly victims.
Yes.
We could do a whole episode there.
Yet, well, it is, and it's very prevalent these days. Look, avoiding accountability keeps us in these ruminating cycles of blame or bitterness, victimhood, like as you said. And but here's the thing, and this is kind of the ironic thing, and we all see this, especially those of us who are kind of through most of this, and we start to look back to help others heal. Right. The fact is, many of us want to grow. We do, and a lot of people, they all say, "I value truth." However, when the truth demands that they look inside instead of outside, most of these people kind of flinch or they
Yep.
seize up. And this radical accountability is hard because it requires a rebalancing of the ego and the soul. It asks it asks us to surrender those stories that you're talking about that lead to victimhood. You
Yeah.
got to
Well,
stop.
it's externalizing that responsibility.
Yeah. Well, you have to surrender and stop ruminating over these stories that keeps that keeps us comfortable. I think you said it in a few shows back, where people become comfortable in their pain. We have to surrender those stories. We got to get rid of them,
Yeah.
and we got to stop blaming stuff behind us all the time. We have to stop blaming our pain. We have to stop blaming our parents. We got to stop blaming
Yeah.
our friends and partners, and really to say, this is mine, I own this. That's not easy to do. It's easy to say.
And that doesn't
So
mean blame yourself either, but it just means
absolutely.
taking accountability. There is a difference here, as we keep saying. You know, I read this book a couple months ago called The Seven Pillars of Self-Esteem. It was a really good read. But one of the topics they went over is a lot of people who get stuck in this cycle of blame and victimhood. The reason it's why people get stuck there. And if you're listening and you're someone, if you can look at yourself enough to be like, hey, maybe that's me. It's not that these cycles necessarily are inherently bad. All things we do, self destructive or maladaptive, these are all things we learn to survive. And there's a need being met by these ways of showing up in the world. I know for me, I went through a lot growing up. And so I used to wear that like a badge of honor. Look at me, I'm positive. I've been through all this crap.
Mm,
And that was my way of validating when I felt bad for other people to be like, you know what? I'm on a high road here. Look at
mm,
me here. It's like, follow my example. And it's like, that's not how to go about it. But again, these coping mechanisms we develop, they're there for a reason. They're trying to protect us. And so
mm.
the more we can identify them, and again without judgment, the more we can start giving that internal. We might cringe when we go to look, but we can start accepting it, giving compassion to it, even thanking these parts for ourselves that we deem unworthy or unacceptable.
Yeah. All things in life can be teachers or destroyers, and you get to make that decision. Because really, the more you avoid responsibility, the more you surrender your power. That's how you reclaim your authentic power that's only for you. And as I'm fond of saying about the path of Ashla, we don't seek perfection. Again, we seek what? Alignment.
Yeah,
And
harmony.
and this idea of radical accountability brings you back into that, closer to that alignment. Maybe not always there, but it brings you back in that direction when you start to drift off in one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, and another big part with this, what you're saying there is, I mean, we talk often about how important, how much we as people we crave control.
Mm-hmm.
When we can develop and harness radical accountability, that gives us the power to realize that which is in our control
Mm-hmm.
instead of handing it out to others, like that boss that puts you down or makes your life a living hell, or that
Right.
relationship that also does the same thing. It's taking back the power and acknowledging that you're allowing yourself to put up with this. And it doesn't mean it's not going to take hard steps to get out of that. But the more you can take that accountability, the more you can see things with clarity.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And it really just brings you back closer to that authentic self.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is, once you take in responsibility, you're starting to walk with truth.
You brought up a good point with the authentic self too. One thing, I mean, I used to suffer with addiction, and I realized one of the keys in my addiction was how much I saw my addiction as a problem. The more I labeled it, the more I judged it, but the less I was accountable with accepting that I had an addiction and that I
Right.
had a problem, the harder it became to manage. The more we can accept these things, the less resistance we're going to have in having those motions, those pivots that allow us to start changing our lives because we create that cognitive dissonance of who you want to be and who you are
Yeah.
because you make this a giant obstacle to overcome instead of making the little shifts necessary and loving yourself along the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being accountable with where you're at and what it's going to take instead of I can go from here to here.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, again, the ego doesn't want to be wrong. It craves justification. It doesn't care about growth. It's fine sitting where it is. It really wants to win all the time. It wants
Yeah.
to prove and defend and deflect and really protect your image, right?
Yeah.
And this idea of radical accountability means letting go of the idea of how this looks, right?
Yeah, Image, no, you said the perfect phrase there.
In favor of what is real.
Yes.
So, right. So we need to start learning how to choose truth over image, and that's how we start to go kind of in this authenticity. And
Yeah.
let's talk about blame for a second. Blame feels easier.
Yeah. It even gets you, it helps you feel that sense of superiority, that sense of
Yeah.
power, makes you feel like you have control over the situation and the person and that you're up here in this dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, blame is so powerful.
It is because it feels easy. It's like, oh, I can just blame everything, and people let you get away with it too.
Damn.
Blaming others is kind of emotionally easier than facing our blinders, our blind spots, where we're not. I don't want to look over there. I don't want to look over here because that's something I have to face. I can just blame somebody for that. If we can say they did this to me, if you can say that a lot, they over there did this to me. They over there, they, then you don't have to change. You can just stay perfect as you think you are, as your ego may think you are, and you just point the finger, point that dirty finger at everybody. But it's not real power. It keeps you powerless.
Yeah. Well, you
So
notice a lot of people who practice blame on a consistent basis who really struggle with that accountability are some of the most angry people you ever meet, or some of the most miserable in life.
yeah,
And it's because the soul knows.
it
When we
does.
push away that authenticity and we try to put that blame elsewhere, our soul turns on us. We start getting in our heads and cultivating self hatred. Even if we're not like, oh, I was a horrible person for doing that. These little tally marks we keep, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, yeah, we do. So, and then another reason why it's hard for people is because they mistake accountability for shame. I think we talked about shame a few
Yeah.
minutes ago. So, a lot of people will equate accountability with like guilt or punishment. And this gets them back, and this starts the cycle of rumination and the what ifs and
Yeah.
stuff that's not good for you. But this idea of accountability, radical accountability, it's not shame, it's showing strength. It
Yeah.
says, I made that choice and now I get to choose again.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense. And I think you're on the money here with shame because, I mean, you see it. How many people do you know that struggle with this accountability when you try to even have a personal conversation with them about, hey, I noticed this. I can tell you're struggling because of it. Like, what are some ways where you could possibly work? And it becomes an instant battle
Mm-hmm.
because they're affronted. And it's probably because they told themselves that 1,000 times.
Yeah.
But it's people who are driven by shame, especially when it comes to accountability. They do not want to be held accountable by anyone. And anyone who does, it's an immediate threat. Their nervous systems will kick on into fight or flight
Mm-hmm.
immediately because
Yeah.
of that repression.
Right. And then they do get angry later because then they ruminate and they sit there and think, man, oh God, what did I do? What if? What if I do this?
Yep. Or that jerk wagon.
Yeah. They. Who are they? No one's ever been able to answer that question for me. When someone says they did this, I always ask them, I always ask them, who are they? Can you point them out? Can you describe who they are? Because they don't exist, really,
Yeah.
right?
It's what they've created in their minds.
There's a lot of self trust that's required with this idea. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
To take that full responsibility, you have to believe that you can do better, that there's room for growth. And you have to really trust that you're strong enough to see your shadow and still find yourself worthy while you work this out. Because it's not, look, this isn't about being flawless or perfect, because that's not possible. And you shouldn't be aiming for that anyway, because you just get lost in the weeds because of that. It's about being fearless in this idea of being honest with yourself and accountable. So that's why it's hard.
What is, I mean, they talk about as as you get into this journey, it gets worse before it gets better. And it's because as you get to sit with these uncomfortable parts, you have to accept these parts of yourself, these parts that you've disowned, these parts that you've done everything you can to not have light shone on them.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start shining the light on them, you can't unsee it.
No, once you see it, you can unsee it. Yeah. And once you know better, you must do
You
better.
know?
Even if it's a tiny little bit every day. It's a tiny little bit every single day. Practice, practice, practice.
Yeah. I know. If we didn't bring that up, it was going to be at the end of the show because this is one of those things where radical accountability, it sounds great. You can see the logic we are speaking, but it takes time to
Mm,
cultivate the skills where you can do this effortlessly.
right.
One of my things I've been really practicing this year is it's like I will tell no lies no matter how small. So if someone asks me how's your day, and I'm gonna be like, oh, it's a good day, I'm fine. It's like, no, it's been a rough day. I'm getting through it, but it's been a rough day. And
Right.
the other important area there is I'm making sure I don't lie to myself.
Mm,
It's like, am I doing okay? No, I'm feeling it today. That's okay. But
right.
I'm
Right.
not gonna sugarcoat it.
And most people don't care when they ask you. So, hey, you know what? To be honest, it's been a day. It's been a day, but I'll get
Yep.
through. And that usually lets them off the hook so they don't have to feel
Yeah.
like they have to do it right or something,
Fucking A.
Yeah.
So the power of ownership, the benefits to cultivating this type of accountability. There are so many things we can gain when we start cultivating this skill. I think one of the most important ones, because you see it in society so predominantly, is people struggle so much with self worth.
Mm,
And again, that inner tally your soul's making, your self worth drives not from your words, but by your actions. And your soul notices when your words and actions don't line up. Self worth is built upon the self trust and the way you show up, not just for yourself, but for those you care about.
This is where accountability starts to transform things from something we fear to something that we embrace. And sometimes it's like hugging the cactus,
Yeah.
but it shifts the energy from this resistance to empowerment. When you own your choices, your energy, your truth, your authenticity, all the stuff, you stop being a victim of your own story and just you start actually starting to write a different story. You become an author to your story instead of just a helpless observer.
Well said.
And it's hard. Like we said, we get it. It's hard. It was hard for me. It was hard for him. And
Yeah.
sometimes we go back into it a little bit and we got to
Pull
bring ourselves
ourselves back
down,
out. Yeah.
right? But once you embrace it, it becomes one of the most liberating practices on this spiritual path that you will encounter. It's one of the most powerful things for me that got me into alignment with lots of other stuff that I didn't even know it existed until I became more aligned with it. And again, because we're not talking about shame, we're not talking about guilt, we're talking about ownership is power here. So when you fully own your reactions and your mistakes and your tone and your intentions and your habitual patterns, which by the way, again, can be teachers or destroyers, you start to find power and you start to invest in parts of yourself that actually help you grow and transform into a better version.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. As you start to transform this practice, it has ripple effects in the rest of your life, from your relationships to your goals to your self development. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, think about those you love when they do you wrong and then they don't hold themselves accountable. It creates friction.
Yeah.
But when you can create a space of accountability where you can own up to your stuff, watch the people in your life that truly are there for you welcome you with open arms. And in turn, watch as they start doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Lead by example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Same with goals. The more you can take accountability for your life and why your goals are not opening up. You can blame it on not enough time. You can blame it on not enough energy. You can blame it on this, that, or the other. But as you start to be accountable with, it's my choice what I do with my time, and I'm not using it wisely. Your soul will know that. It will absorb that, and it'll allow you to create the space to start taking those little steps out of whatever rut you're in life.
Yeah. Yeah. So ownership, taking ownership does a lot of things for us. It helps build our integrity, right? Because you start to
Yeah.
become someone that people can trust because your words, actions, and your energy align with each other. It's, as I said a minute ago, it starts to accelerate your growth and transformation. You stop waiting for others to change and you start to just kind of evolving on your own terms, under
Yeah.
your own authenticity.
No longer becomes a competition where you're looking at everybody else and you're trying to, yeah,
Exactly. Perfectly said. It creates clarity. We talk about clarity on this path a lot, which is just kind of like this superpower of awareness. And when you own your part, you start to be less confused. The fog moves and it lifts, and you see clearly what you need to do next. Because again, this is steps. We're always doing steps. The biggest thing ownership does is it starts to bring you closer to that inner peace because you don't carry the burden of pretending with the mask and defending your image, right?
yeah,
You
running from your truth.
you walk in truth. Exactly. You stop running from your truth and you turn and face it and you walk in it. This is the path of what I would call personal sovereignty. It's what and these two axioms that I'll share with you, it's what these axioms call us to do. These axioms, these two in particular, require ownership for them to be activated. So the first one is don't compound matters by repeating mistakes. Got to own those mistakes, learn from them. When we know better, we must do better. And the other axiom is to tolerate lesser things is wise and kindly, as this cultivates inner strength. All these other things I just talked about: integrity, growth, clarity, and peace.
100%. No, those axioms touch on such great points with this because the more tolerant we become of ourselves, the more tolerant we become of our mistakes,
Yeah.
the more open and accepting we become of others, the more we don't have that reactionary period where people mess up and it triggers our own mess ups we're hiding and we get upset.
Yeah. Owning our mistakes is how we stop repeating them.
Yeah.
It's really that simple. Owning, being aware of, and owning our patterns, our habits that are probably not great for us is how you stop tolerating them.
Yeah. And one
Owning,
thing I want to throw out there with habits
yeah.
and patterns, especially like addiction and
Mhm.
being in bad situations in life or just in ruts, being stagnant, it doesn't mean I'm stagnant in life and I'm not doing anything. I should do something. That is
Right,
not the type of accountability we're talking about.
right.
It's one realizing, hey, I have an issue here. And then having the courage to ask yourself, what got me here? What holds me here? What
Hmm.
is it that perpetuates the self sabotaging behaviors I bring to my life? Because it's never as simple as I have an addiction. I'm just shy. It's compounded issues that you have shoved down and avoided looking at that you're not willing to face. And again, when you turn and face it, it doesn't mean, okay, you know what? I had a rough childhood. I was bullied. That's my issue. Okay, I'm going to be good now. It goes into that practice, practice, practice. Now that you have that awareness, that accountability with this made me like this, I don't blame these people, but this programmed me to now respond like this to make sure that I don't go into that kind of suffering.
Yeah,
Let me now try to figure out what little changes I can make to start showing up in life differently.
yeah, yeah. Well said.
And the more you do this, I loved your analogy of the author. The more you start taking accountability in life, the more you start having these little shifts in your life and you be accountable with how you feel, being accountable with where you're at. Stop looking at everyone else and everything else that's causing you to be there. And you start taking that accountability. You go from being someone who is existing to someone who is creating.
Yeah, yeah.
Because,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. And you stop reacting. You start responding. You start choosing how you're going to take your next step.
yeah,
And you stop being defined by your past and you actually start defining what your light is. right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy how much change can happen. We get stuck on, oh, this is how I am. Oh, that's just how I was raised. The more we can get away from these darn dialogues and
Mm,
realize that we are endless potentials. Yes, we all have our temperaments. We all have certain parts about us that define us as a person. Like, I could never be an aggressive, angry person. But it doesn't mean I can't be assertive and strong with my boundaries and being able to have hard conversations with those I love if they're willing to have those conversations with me.
yeah. 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 Well said. So how do we start practicing this stuff?
Man, well, like most of these things we talk about, it always starts in one place: self reflection. Where am I outsourcing responsibility?
Mm-hmm.
And, we do it in so many subtle ways that we don't even pick up on it. But the more we can sit back and ask ourselves, where am I not taking accountability in my life? Where in my life am I suffering and I'm looking outwards, not inwards? And in those areas, you're going to really start to find the magic you are looking for. Or as that one quote goes, I love it,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which
That's a
is
good
exactly this.
one. And look, philosophy without a way to practice is just noise. It's just pretty words on a parchment or something, and not much worth to it if you can't practice it and practice it, practice it. What this ideal does for our philosophy, the one we teach and practice every day, and our teachings, it turns those into transformative things, right? And we find this transformation through practice, because this isn't just a concept, the things we're talking about today. It must be a daily practice, because it lives in your tone and it lives in your choices and your reactions and your thoughts and your silence. And the
And in your
more you
mask.
ask and the more you practice it, the more powerful, peaceful, and trustworthy you become. So one go-to I would use would be the pause, pausing before blame. We like to pause a lot here, right? Because it's important. It goes back to that introspection you talked about.
Right.
Pausing before blaming somebody or something, or they, or my boss, or my girlfriend, or whatever. Whenever something goes wrong and you feel the urge to point the filthy, dirty finger at something else, you need to ask yourself, what part did I play in this? What could I have done differently? Now, look, sometimes other people are at fault too, but you don't worry about their part. It's none of your business. Your part is yourself, the stuff, your side, your things that may have not started it, but it sure helped it spin out of control. And
I mean,
don't try to
sometimes it's just seeing the red.
justify. Don't try to justify or shrink from your part.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes your part is as simple as you trusted someone where you saw red flags where you shouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not blaming them or saying they're a bad person. This is where they're at in their life. This is their own maladaptive coping mechanism to survive. And it was your choice to trust this person. It doesn't mean beat yourself up. Some people are amazing con artists.
Yes, some people are super narcissists that get
Yeah.
past the best of us. Another thing that I like to bring up, as far as how we practice, is you start to learn how to own the energy you bring, the way your presence, your tone, your body language, your timing. We talked about lots of these things on the last show that we were on communication. You have to tell yourself, I'm not just responsible for what I say, I'm responsible for how I show up, because miscommunication is a really, really easy way for things to go south. Happens all the time. We talked about this in that communication show.
So, what are some tools people can use to help reclaim
Well,
accountability?
you have to learn to apologize without making excuses or justifications. Right?
Yes.
That's a big one. Drop the butt, right? Drop
Yeah.
drop the defense. You could say something like, "Listen, I know my words caused you harm. That wasn't my intention, but I own this, and I'd like an opportunity to do better." And
Yeah.
you're not saying, "Okay, yeah. I didn't mean to say that, but if you weren't acting like this, I wouldn't have to say stuff like that."
A
Right?
good way to look at this: don't let your apology be about you.
Right. Yes. Perfect. Yes. And, like, so these patterns that show up, and this has kind of been kind of mixing up in my life too. This week has felt like just a long week, and there's a lot of annoyances in there and stuff. And let's say tomorrow I decide to snap and flip my desk over at work, right?
Right.
And it wasn't just today. I've been stressed all week about this or that. Or when you're really trying to hide from everyone instead of taking this responsibility, it wasn't just today that I withdrew and that I started to just avoid ghosting people and avoid contact. I've probably been avoiding discomfort all week. And we have an opportunity when we think about this idea of radical accountability to pause and say, what pattern am I repeating? Just because I blew up today, I probably was following a pattern all week up until this moment. So it's about being aware. And you always listen. You can apologize perfectly. You can do all the things we're talking about, but you have to follow it up with action that is aligned with what you're saying and with what you're doing. So it isn't just words, it's actually changing and growing out of an old habit or pattern. You have to correct the behavior. You have to heal what's happening in there. And if you have lost trust with people or you're just trying to build trust, you have to build the trust or rebuild that trust, and it takes time. So, you can say to yourself something like, I own it, but I'm working on it. Just give me some space, give me some time, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's honesty.
Yeah. Well,
So
then there's also the other side of the spectrum. It's like you got to look at because it's some people find it easy to take ownership. If I take ownership, then I don't have to be upset at this person. I don't have to stand up for myself because the problem's on me. This happens all the times in relationships. But it's important to say what's mine to own and what's not. To make that separation. And again, this isn't blame, this isn't judgment, pointing fingers. This is just acknowledging with that radical accountability.
yeah, but it's something to remember. It's not just forgetting everything else that your part played in it and just owning the outcome. You got to start to recognize and own all the parts in it that you did. And, if you're just coming up at the end saying, okay, I know a person who I will not mention who is horrible at apologizing. I give her lots of grace because I love her very much, but she's horrible at apologizing because it has a lot of the things I was saying in it. And she's getting better over time, but it's like she will apologize for how things ended up, right? I apologize for this fight. No. What part in this are you apologizing for? Because when we stop and break it down, and her and I can talk about it like this because we have trust with each other. When you can break it down, then you can start to learn from that and then say, okay, because I don't want her taking responsibility for a fight. You know why? Can you guess why? I don't want her taking responsibility for the whole fight.
Because it's not all our responsibility.
It's not. I was duking it out too, right?
You know?
I've got some ownership in this, so I could have chose to just say, not today, girlfriend. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh, but I didn't. I said, okay, let's roll up the sleeves. You want to go? I've been itching all week to go with somebody, right? So,
Yeah.
no, I'm not going to let her apologize for the whole thing. But once we get to the point where we can start picking it apart, okay, then we can start making apologies to each other that actually carry weight and carry power and honor that love and trust, right? So, yeah,
Well, and it's like one of the things as you start to heal, as you start to build yourself up, you start to realize the truth in the saying you can only meet people as deeply as they're willing to meet themselves. Because you start to realize these relationships where there isn't that there's a level of shallowness to it.
yeah,
Without that depth, there's no true accountability or trust or depth. Because when you can be open and honest, have those hard conversations, have those moments of weakness without fear of judgment or seeming lesser than, you cultivate real relationships, which is, I think, one of the biggest things radical accountability can give us is the benefits in relationships.
yes, yeah. Because this is where we start to take ownership of how we show up with others, not just with ourselves. So now we're taking all the things we're learning and practicing them in real time, right? With
You know,
other independent, sovereign human beings. So this is where it actually deepens our understanding of this concept and strengthens it because now we get to practice. Once we
Right.
get the concept in our head and we start taking ownership and oh, wow, this actually feels good. I actually feel more present. I feel more powerful,
Feel liberated.
liberated, free. But then somebody shows up, and now you gotta. It's where it starts to get. Now, and this is where the rubber meets the road, where you have to really put these things into practice. And of course, this again aligns with our teachings on emotional mastery and compassion and humility, but more importantly, authenticity, because within there's boundaries and there's you know presenting in a way that is truly us. But this is where it gets fun, because if you really want those soul nourishing, relationships, you got to learn to bring more ownership than blame. Zero blame if you can handle it, right? And
And it doesn't mean tolerating everything and
no,
anything.
of course not. Yeah. But you got to be more honest. You got to stop performing. I think we talked about this in a different show. Can the performance just show up?
Yeah.
But this ideal in relationships also means that you stop using someone else's behavior as the reason for everything.
Yeah.
It's you. You're ready to throw your values and virtues and your beliefs out the window because this person made me. This person is acting out of line, so therefore I must act out of line.
Right, right.
You have to take full responsibility for your side of the connection, as I was just talking about, no matter what the other person does.
Well,
What?
it's like boundaries, right? I mean, boundaries is a form of is an act of self accountability. We don't have boundaries for other people to be accountable.
Mm-hmm.
These are what is important for us, but
Yes.
boundaries are for us to be accountable with we will tolerate in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. This does not mean we excuse harmful behavior or harmful people. Sometimes people never have the right to be in our lives again. But
Yeah.
if they're not quite 86th out of your universe just yet, you have to realize that all your power lies in your response to what they're doing, your boundaries, your integrity, your tone, your authenticity. And, as you said, those are for us, because if we bring ourselves to a point where this is my character, this is my integrity, my boundaries are not to accept or even entertain these things that blatantly disrespect those or are the opposite of those. Those are boundaries. We can't control what they're doing. So
Yeah.
we make boundaries for us.
Yeah. When it's taking ownership without enabling.
Yeah.
Because people will push on those boundaries, especially if you're new to boundaries. People don't like boundaries,
They
but
don't.
if they care, they will respect them. You might have that initial outburst, and this isn't fair. I don't like this. But if they love you, they'll adapt because
Yeah.
that's what love is, especially as we grow as people.
Yeah.
It's taking ownership without enabling,
Yeah.
but it's also owning your triggers but not owning their behavior. It's
Mm-hmm.
finding that balance because in relationships, it gets, in my opinion, for me, accountability in relationships was much harder than accountability with myself, mainly
Yeah.
because I fell more on this side of the spectrum. Again, it was easier to blame myself than it was to blame anyone else because if I took that blame, I didn't have to worry about all the negative emotions and consequences of those relationships.
Yeah.
But learning how to be firm in my boundaries, to understand what I will tolerate in my life and how I need to present those to those I love because it's not that I just want to, oh, you're out of my life. You're not good for me. You're not good for me. We're all on a journey. We're all evolving and growing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's learning where to draw those lines where it's like, if you keep crossing this boundary, you're going to move further and further out of my sphere.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm an 86 you just right off into the galaxy
Yep.
if it gets too bad.
Yeah.
So we were talking about a few minutes ago, kind of what this owning our stuff looks like for us, and just a couple of things when you now have a sparring partner in front of you, right? Where you're just like
you know?
fighting it out. This gives you a chance to own your tone and own your words and own your body language and all these facets of communication, even when you are right. So,
Yeah.
that's a tough one. Um,
Oh,
ap-
God, yeah.
Apologizing for your impact, or at least acknowledging your impact when it shakes a person up, and not worried about defending your intention. Well, that wasn't my intention, but it still happened, right? It
Right.
still happened.
Well, perception is reality, right? I mean, when it comes down to it, one of the hardest lessons I had to learn through the years is no matter what you're doing in life, no matter the relationships you have, everyone has their own perception. And it's
Mhm.
not that you need to coddle and curate to everybody's perception, but you do need to respect that everyone has their own perception of reality, of events, of how things are handled, what's right, what's wrong. And if you infringe on their own perception of what is good,
Mhm.
it's on you to take accountability for, hey, I'm sorry I upset you like this.
Yeah.
Even if I know I was doing the right thing. And again,
Right.
you don't say that, just internal monologue.
Yes. Yeah. Don't accidentally say it like I have before.
Yeah, but it is genuinely, hey, I'm sorry I brought you this discomfort. I know that's
Right.
one of the things I've run into when I've had hard conversations with people as I've been developing that respect and asking for that kind of respect in return.
Hmm.
And people get defensive, and it's like, I am so sorry that this is uncomfortable for you. This is my truth, and I need to stand by it. But I respect that you don't like this, and I'm sorry for that discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm really trying to say this in a way that's kinder, but sometimes I can't. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah.
Another thing that happens a lot in these kind of issues where we're, kind of arguing, or we're in relationship things, is it's easy for us to call out people for their bad bad patterns or their bad habits, or the things they're doing wrong in the argument or the whatever that you're having, but not being able to admit to your own. So, you have to, this radical responsibility is you not only see what they're doing and perhaps maybe call it out if it needs to be called out, but also accepting and admitting yours as well. So,
And being accountable with it's not your job to change people. You can present people with logic, but the law of confusion, people won't hear what needs to be seen or understood until they are ready to see and
so they
understand it.
are ready. Yes. This kind of ownership is powerful because it creates an atmosphere within a relationship where, you don't have to defend yourself against me. I'm not here to win. I'm
Yeah,
not here to lose. I'm here to build with you. And
yeah.
this could be any kind of relationship, romantically, platonic, friends, whatever, family. It could be, at the end of the day, we try, when we're wounded, we try to defend ourselves and try to fight back, or we withdraw too far away. So, because relationships are mirrors, right? We've talked
That
about this.
100%.
Um, and we interact, and we start to see our own wounds, our own habits, our own shadows, but we also, if we choose to, we can see our capacity to heal and grow and make different choices. It's a really high act of love to say to somebody, I will not make you responsible for my peace. I bring peace with me into this between us. You bring your peace, I'll bring my peace. You're not responsible for my peace or my reactions or anything. So it's a very, very high lovey thing to say to somebody, because if you can say that to somebody, you really love them and you really want to build with them.
That's beautiful. You got anything else you want to add to this before we jump into their affirmations?
No, man, this was a really great topic, and I think its timing is always perfect for all of us, because these are things that we have to remember. And those on this path or similar adjacent paths, listen, you are going to be held to a higher standard, because once you know better, you must do better. And this kind of path that we walk, and this kind of philosophy we teach and we practice, requires a high degree of responsibility and accountability and respect and the rest of the agreements. But we have to get up every morning and try our best. So,
Yeah. Even if that's not perfect, because it never
you got
is.
this, man. Listen, y'all got this. I believe in you. You got this. You guys got this.
But again, it's just practice,
This is a
right?
great audience. They understand, and I trust that they'll do the right thing for themselves and
And
others.
that's why they're here, right?
I hope so. Yeah.
So for our affirmations today, I am responsible for my life, and that is my greatest power. I take ownership of my actions, choices, and healing with courage and grace. I release blame and reclaim my role as the creator of my reality. I hold myself accountable, not to punish myself, but to empower my growth. So for our exercise today, find one place in your life where you need more accountability. If there are multiple or this is something you struggle with, pick something small.
Yes.
For example, saying no. I know that was something I struggled with years and years ago. I always tried to please people, so I'd always agree to do things even when I didn't want to.
Right.
Find this area and start making little steps to start being accountable. Maybe there's that relationship where you never made that peace. Maybe there's something you're doing that you're not being fully honest with yourself about the impact it's having on your life. Find this area and start taking those steps to radical accountability. Because again, this is something that takes practice, this is something that takes work. And the more you practice it, the easier it gets, and the more you regain your power in your life. And then for the journaling prompt, right along the same lines. What's one area in your life where you're ready to take radical responsibility? No more bullcrap, no more blame.
Mhm.
Where are you ready to take charge of your life? Write down what this is and the steps you can take to start doing so. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you got as much out of this conversation as we did. I love this topic, and I think I needed to hear it a bit myself today. With love and gratitude, Ad Lucem.
Ad lucem.